The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Hello, friends, and welcome to our next episode of the HX Collective podcast, where we bring guests into our orbit, united around our common mission to elevate human flourishing. We are about to have a great conversation with my guest today. You're going to meet Dr. Mikah Sellers, who is at the cutting, dare I say, bleeding edge of understanding the intersection between emotional intelligence and how that intersects with this age of AI. Dr. Sellers is going to give us his perspective, not only as an academic, someone who is a book author. He's also in the real world advising organizations and institutions on how to capitalize on all of the profitability and the potential that this present day gives us. It's also really fun when you get to bring in a guest who's been introduced to you by somebody you absolutely love. So it would be really fitting for me to give a shout out to our shared friend, Liz Haar from Hinge Marketing. And when we talk about people who are at the forefront of flourishing, let me encourage all of you to check out the great work that they're doing. So without further ado, Mikah, great to have you with us today, and so excited for our audience to get a chance to really participate with us in this such a critical and important conversation. But before we dig in and talk about your book, we talk about the great work that you're doing within your podcast, we talk about the new book that I just learned you're currently authoring. Can you give our audience a little bit of context to really set the stage on how you are starting in this conversation to present day, so we understand where you're coming from as we get into our conversation?
First, thanks for having me on, Deb. I greatly appreciate it. Let's kind of like rewind the tape a little bit. I spent about 20 years of my life post-military in various individual contributor and leadership roles, kind of at the intersection of marketing and technology, so that MarTech space, including stints as a chief digital officer and chief innovation officer. Back in 2016, when I was serving as a chief digital officer for an agency, I had the opportunity to attend the Wharton Advanced Management Program. It's a kind of like a finishing school for senior leaders, most of which have already completed an MBA. And prior to going to AMP, you do a bunch of different assessments, DISC assessments, personality assessments, et cetera. And you get a readout of what the findings are when you show up one-on-one with a coach. And as we know, as leaders, right, there's the person you think you are, and then there's the person you really are, right? And unless you do those kinds of 360-degree assessments, you never really get a true sense of what your leadership reality is. So when I got my readout at AMP, I was a little shocked. I thought I was a relatively emotionally intelligent human being, although at the time I didn't really fully understand what the definition of that was. But I found out that I had a lot of areas of opportunity. And during the course of the program, we had a professor who came and spoke on emotional intelligence, and she was just brilliant. And it really piqued my interest. So I dove in, I started reading a few books, obviously Goldman's books on emotional intelligence. And a couple of years later, when I was serving as the chief innovation officer at a learning as a services company, it occurred to me that I should probably go back to school and get a doctorate at some point. It was like, one of those kind of audacious but achievable goals that I had my bucket list. So I dove headlong in. I reapplied to Penn, to the doctoral program there in organizational learning and leadership. And about halfway through, I kind of made the determination that I would focus my research on the efficacy of emotional intelligence, in particular for senior executive leaders.
Okay.
And that's what got me here.
I love it. Well, first of all, there are so many things that you've already shared that the audience would do well to take note. So, first of all, how powerful it is to put yourself in the scenario of being assessed and then having enough emotional intelligence to see where you may not have enough emotional intelligence. I would say, by definition, that's emotional intelligence, but that awareness and the value of having that opportunity. Secondly, I think the possibility for those of us who that audacious was an understatement. The idea that having already had a storied career in military, accomplishing so much as a C-suite level executive, and then discerning a desire to take a deeper dive. There's so much inspiration in that in pursuit of your doctorate, and to pursue your doctorate in a space where it might be tempting, if I could say, somebody with a military background in marketing and technology, working as an innovation officer in digital space. The idea that you would add something that sometimes gets put in the soft skills side of the equation, the fact that that was a big part of your inspiration, I can't wait to unpack that more. So, as you are thinking about that and now kind of bringing us to present day, share with our audience what it is that you're doing today. And I also want to talk a little bit about the big picture of your work and your business. And then we're going to also talk a little bit about your podcast. As a podcaster interviewing a podcaster, no shortage of intimidation, friends. I'm just going to tell you. But all that to be said, I am really happy for our audience to get to know a little bit about now, present day. Where are you, and what are the kinds of things that you're doing in your work, in your consulting practice? Let's start there.
Sure. So, present day, I've kind of stepped away from the corporate arena, and I'm kind of in startup land. I started a kind of side consulting practice a number of years ago, but I hadn't really focused full time on it until probably middle of last year. It's called Empathos, and I really work at the intersection of human AI integration, right? So when we think about how humans can kind of co-pilot with AI, doesn't matter the function, could be accounting, finance, could be marketing, sales, could be operations. What I'm helping my clients to do is to harness the power of AI while simultaneously harnessing the full power of the humans within their organization. So when you think about what AI can bring us, certainly AI from a general intelligence perspective is greatly surpassing what we can do as humans, right? So if you want to master the domain of finance, or you want to master the domain of accounting, certainly you can still go to college, you can still get a degree in it, but the reality is you can train an agent to do that in a matter of hours, right? Harnessing the corpus of information that is necessary for it to learn. What AI really can't do is it can't bring some of the really essential human skills to the mix that are uniquely human. I put those into two buckets: power skills and generative skills. Power skills being emotional intelligence, moral and ethical discernment. Generative skills being our human ability to innovate, our human ability to bring ingenuity to the table, our ability to manage change, right? The things that, were our creative muscles that allow us, to pull together, whether it's a human team on the engineering side, or a team of AI agents, right? To build something, whether it's a human accounting team, that can do amazing things, or a team of AI agents who are managing complex accounting in a multinational corporation, right? So that's one aspect of what I'm doing. And then on the side, I'm also working on another startup, which is kind of like, to be honest, it's a little bit in the secret phase right now. It's going to be a platform as a service that I'm building for the veteran community that I deeply care about. And hopefully we'll be releasing that soon. And it's designed to help veteran entrepreneurs accelerate the growth of their businesses.
Okay. So much inspiration in what you just said. And I have been remiss in not acknowledging, thank you for your service. I know that as a veteran and now a person who is in that give back and pay it forward on behalf of that community, I can't wait to hear more about that. So let's just keep that as an open invitation when you're ready to go live. That will be a great service. When we think about elevating human flourishing, what an amazing community of people that we really owe our flourishing to for the service that you and your brothers and sisters have engaged in our military. I also think I love that you are acknowledging sort of the practical reality of what it means to be a human in the spirit of a tool, a set of tools, agents that are surpassing our human capacities and knowledge. And yet there's still a role, there's still a place for the human being. And so let's talk a little bit about that as you think about your book. So I know you're in the process of writing the second, but I want to take a step back. So for people who can get to know you just in a general sense as a starting point, you wrote a book called Forging Emotionally Intelligent Leaders in the Age of AI. So if we were going to give us a high level, kind of book summary of, if I were to get that book, I were to read it, what would be the things that a person could anticipate to learn or to become more aware of or to engage as you think about the inspiration behind the original book?
Sure. So this is my book.
I love
As
it.
you mentioned, it's
Rob?
Forging Emotional Intelligent Leaders in the Age of AI. It really kind of breaks down into 3 arcs. So the first arc is really looking at, what are the challenges that we're facing in the age of AI and robotics, right? So when you think about, machines thinking faster, right? Just accelerating at a pace that we haven't really seen in human history. We've had lots of waves of technological revolution. None of them are quite like what we're seeing now. And it's only going to get more complicated, but at the same time unleash tremendous opportunity. But with opportunity comes challenges that we need to face as humankind. The second part of the book really looks at that through the lens of, how can we really train leaders to be emotionally intelligent? What I found in my research at Penn was that, you know, training is transfer, doesn't work. You can't bring a group of executives into a corporate boardroom and have some great speaker come in with some brilliant slideware and talk about, the importance of self-awareness or organizational awareness or empathy, and develop those competencies, right? Human beings, in particular adult learners, learn differently. We know that from adult learning theory. We know that from experiential learning theory. We know that from the theory of personal identity, right, which is a huge part of becoming emotionally intelligent. It's a part of your identity, right? And identity level change is really, really challenging. What I also found was that behavioral change, identity level change, takes time, and it also takes the ability to do 2 things. One is stepping out of your space. So corporate training inside your 4 walls for things like behavioral change, in particular for emotional intelligence, likely won't work, right? It'll likely fail. So you have to step out of those 4 walls. Another thing is experiential learning is crucial. We have to experience things in order to really have the ability to reflect on it, and then the muscle memory, right, to put it into play when it comes to our behaviors. Let me give you an example, an experience that I went through, relating back to my A&P experience. So when I was at A&P, we had a series of experiential exercises, one of which was this exercise called Film Odyssey, where we had a time-bound exercise. It was like 2 days where we had to create a film as a small team. So my class is about 30 people. They broke that down into teams of 5. And then you had to kind of choose roles, who's going to be the director, who's going to be the producer, et cetera, et cetera. Everything from that process of self-organization through the actual final editing of the film introduces many, many challenges, in particular from a group of people who recently just met, have their own idea of who's alpha male, who's alpha female, et cetera, right? So all those dynamics come into play. The ability to tell this story, which was an emotional story, triggered a lot of things in a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And the way that you experience that, the exercise itself was impactful, but then you have the peer reflections on that experience. When we have a group meeting, we talk about how that was. Then you have the ability to unpack that with an executive coach. All of that, you start to see things in yourself because others reflect on it. It's like, hey, Micah, when we were doing this, why did you do X, Y, and Z? And you're like, ooh, I did that. oh, I didn't realize I responded that way, or that I emoted that way, right? So the ability to unpack these things is really, really crucial. So I encourage, executives who are really looking to develop their emotional intelligence to find experiential learning opportunities, right? Where you have the ability to stretch yourself and put yourself outside of your comfort zone. It's only when you leave that comfort zone that you really truly learn. It's when you're tested, when you've met your metal with fire, right? That you have the ability to activate something new and have that aha moment. Because when you look in the mirror, you see a bright, confident person who's capable of accomplishing amazing things. But the reality is, if you take that opportunity to get the reflection from others who are equals, right? Because there's certainly value in having feedback from your subordinates. That's really, really important. But when you have peer reflections on the way that you're behaving, or on the way that you're interacting, in whether it's a professional environment or a personal environment, that's really, really crucial and vital to your growth.
I want to make sure I'm tracking because you're saying so many important things. And in fact, one of my commitments with every one of my podcast guests is, what are those practical takeaways? What's that call to action that somebody could look to do? And I think what you're inspiring is that putting yourself, if one of the gifts you can give yourself, particularly if you are holding a formal leadership role, is to put yourself in an outside of the four walls kind of experience in the name of growth and development, and to do things that make you uncomfortable such that you can then get that breakthrough of insight or perspective. So I think there's a lot of practicality. But stepping back, I want to track back with you. So you said there's 3 arcs of the book. So I got arc number 1.
Oh, yeah, so, yeah.
One is sort of the conditioning. And then the second piece really is what it means to sort of recognize what it means as a leader in this dynamic of AI. Like, what does this mean to be emotionally intelligent? What's the third arc?
Yeah. So the first one obviously is, the age of AI. Why is emotional intelligence important? Second is, how do we develop it within executives? The third, which I think is really crucial, is how do we install emotional intelligence as the organizational operating system? So how once leaders can develop, that level of emotional intelligence that's critical for being a truly great transformational leader, how do we equip others within the organization, our downlines, our VPs, our directors, and then everybody down from them, to be more emotionally intelligent, to create an emotionally intelligent organization so that we can navigate complex change, we can navigate challenges that we face in the marketplace, and that we can aspire to be the best organization we can be.
Okay, so that turn of phrase, emotional intelligence as an operating system, that really speaks to me, and I suspect it will for others, because that makes me step back and say, well, what would have to be true then for that to be at a level of clarity, awareness, capability, presence? Like, what would have to be true if emotional intelligence was an operating system? So again, not something on the edge of like, be nice to people, feel what they're feeling, ask a few questions. Like, no, what is it in a really practical level for that to be an operating system? And it strikes me that while we're all freaking out at some level, with regards to what is AI going to do to me in my work or my job, how is this going to replace the vital functions that for me today are the lifeblood of why my job exists? I mean, there's a lot of anxiety and fear that are just rampant, but this idea that how are we to respond, particularly as leaders, is one, you have to acknowledge it, which is what I'm hearing. Secondly, there's actually a roadmap for engaging the community of people to prepare human beings to be effective in this rapidly changing world where again, AI is taking on function that it's taking on. But then I love this idea of like the outgrowth, that this could actually be a cultural norm in your operating system. It could be even in some spaces a differentiator. So let's dig into this piece around then like emotional intelligence. So I'm operating on an assumption right now that our audience has heard of the term. You mentioned Dr. Goldman, again, the godfather of the construct of EQ and what it means. But let's talk a little bit from your vantage point, particularly because it is informed through a digital experience, a technological marketing experience. How are you defining emotional intelligence? Like, what is it? If I had more of it and it was at the level of an operating system, let's maybe set the stage. Like, what does that actually mean?
Sure. So, funny thing is, my dissertation chair, who's actually my mentor, Annie McKee, Dr. Annie McKee, is co-authors with Dan Goleman on many, many books. So one of the things I didn't do in my book was, define emotional intelligence, because Goleman and many others have done such an amazing job of doing that, right? Fundamentally, it's the ability to identify, understand, manage, and utilize effectively the emotions, your own emotions and the emotions of others, right? To guide thinking, behavior, and relationships. That's it, right? How do we put our own emotions into context when we're engaging with others? How do we put their emotions into context? How does that guide our thinking, our behaviors, and the way that we form and manage relationships?
So thank you, because I do think when you really synthesize it as that's what it is, it starts to then break away with a lot of the myths of just be nicer to people. Like it is there's a sense of self-control, there's a recognition in others. And then you said the word harnessing in a way that has a favorable impact on our organizations around thinking, behavior, and relationships. So when we think about
Right.
human flourishing doesn't happen as a solo sport. It's always in the context of relationships.
100%.
So when you think about that definition, then why do you see, and in your practice, why do leaders and executives struggle so much with it?
Look, I think there's a whole myriad. We could do a whole episode on how a lot of leaders. We've all worked for toxic leaders. We've all worked for leaders who were like, they had areas of opportunity, right? Like, let's just call it that. Look, whether it's their self awareness, organizational awareness, maybe too much of being in the ivory tower, not really paying attention to what's happening at the deck plate level. Some organizations don't even seek feedback, right? They barely ask for customer feedback, let alone the feedback of people inside their four walls of what that work life is like, what the product is like. So you have to look at you mentioned soft skill earlier. I think it's a crucial skill. I don't think it's a soft skill. I think it's a critical skill, in particular in the age of AI, right? When we think about you know experts. Now it's expert systems, expert agents. And if you're building those kinds of systems, it's you're kind of going back to your earlier questions, like why it's important. When you think about emotional intelligence, whether you're designing an AI system, reinventing a process, thinking about how you engage with all your stakeholders, emotional intelligence is critical from a number of lenses. One, just looking at the construct of, let's say you're creating a task force, for any of these activities. Who are you putting on that task force? If the people designing, developing your AI systems are, a bunch of, middle-aged white guys, right? And you're building systems with algorithms, right? Who are going to touch everybody in your ecosystem, right? How are they thinking about how that's going to impact the BIPOC community or impact people with challenges in some other area, neurodivergent challenges? You have to have diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to designing these systems, no matter what it is, because at the end of the day, the impacts, right, affect so many more people than just the people who are doing it. And that takes emotional intelligence. That takes self-awareness of, like, who am I assigned to this? That takes organizational awareness of who's in my organization, right? It takes empathy to understand, like, wow, yeah, that's going to have a huge ripple effect across all of these different stakeholders. Maybe I should slow down. And that's part of the challenge we have in the age of AI, when everything is accelerating, right? As human leaders, looking at the organization saying, well, let's slow this down a little bit, right? Let's slow down to speed up. Because if we slow down and we take the time to truly assess, what is the impact of what it is that we're thinking about doing, you know, how does that calculus affect the people within our organization? How does that affect our customers, our partners, and suppliers? The whole kind of pain chain of people who are going to be involved in this, that takes emotional intelligence, which
Yeah.
is critical. It's not, even if you're using agents to help you navigate the process you're designing, right? You can put in things that you think are the right prompts to elicit those emotionally intelligent responses, but all you're really going to get, right, is a probabilistic response to what the machine thinks EI looks like.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. All right. So two really important takeaways. My brain just exploded when you said we are talking about the example of diversity, equity, inclusion. And it just occurred to me for the first time that DEI is actually a manifestation of emotionally intelligent leadership, like
100%.
as a mechanism to harness thinking, behavior, and relationships. Holy cow. All right. We got to write a podcast on that, or you got to podcast on that, or you got to write a blog on that. Like that is such a critical way of thinking differently about the whole purpose of commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, not just as a feel good, but rather as a business strategy, as a part of that operating system. There's so much power in that. And I wouldn't have seen it. I wouldn't have maybe connected, of course, intuitively, but not in like an explicit way, like commitment to that, even in, like you said, designing the task force and sort of thinking about how we're managing our response to how that can be so favorably influenced. Yeah.
Well, look, the reality is, diversity, equity, inclusion has been hijacked, right? It's been hijacked by, partisan voices on both sides. And if you look at, the writings of great, significantly smarter people than me, like Adam Grant, it's been clear for years, right, that diversity, equity, inclusion is a strategic advantage for any organization who truly embraces it, who truly understands that the diversity of your team creates diversity in thinking. It creates faster accelerations in innovation, the ability to more wisely make decisions that will affect the entire organization. When you have diversity at the C-suite level, your company performs better. There are tons of benchmark studies on that. So we have to look at it for what it is. It's an advantage, and it takes emotional intelligence to understand that. It takes self-awareness to reflect on your own inability to properly, like, I couldn't tell your story. I can't put myself in your shoes. I've never lived your experience. And that's valuable in the context of the organization, right? To be able to understand that and to think, well, our customers are diverse. Why aren't our executives diverse?
Right. You know what? It's so powerful. And when I see it as an operating system now, like ding, 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 like I really hope that people are grabbing that in maybe a new, fresh way. The second thing you just said was about slowing down. I know so many people listening right now, when you think about what is your biggest impediment to flourishing as a leader or to create human flourishing in your lives, in your work life, in your family life, time is, it seems like it is like the greatest gremlin. It's the greatest competitor. It's the greatest threat. And yet any emotionally intelligent leader understands that slow down to speed up. There's so many examples and so many spaces in life. Even like high performing athletes have tapering periods. That they don't play breakneck in training to perform at an elite level, that there are tapering moments. There are those moments of rest, that sense of slowing down to be an optimal athlete. We have so many examples, and yet we mere mortals sometimes will bristle at the idea, or someone were to say, yeah, great, Dr. Sellers, would be nice to slow down, but you don't understand what my board is saying. You don't understand what my shareholders are saying. You don't understand what my investors are saying. You don't understand what my customers are saying. What is your argument or encouragement? You can decide the tone for this idea of one of the most emotionally intelligent things you can do as a leader is to slow down and reflect before you try and speed up and respond, particularly to issues of AI. Give me your argument or encouragement on why that's such a critical building block to see success.
So, you look at two communities, right? The military community and the law enforcement community. There's a mantra, right, in both communities. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right?
Brilliant.
So, and that comes to, being able to respond in incredibly intense situations where, you have to be 100% right. And, when you think about leadership, the decisions that we're making in the corporate boardroom are not the same decisions that you're making on the battlefield. They don't require that level of instant thinking. But the concept of slow is smooth, smooth is fast still works, still applies. If we slow down when it comes to making critical decisions, the smooth is fast part is you can relate that back to organizational change management. So, right, how is it going to play out? How is it going to ripple through the organization when you release that change, or when you release that change initiative? When you think about some of the decisions we've seen, in recent history, I'm not going to name names to protect the innocent, but we've seen a number of, companies in the media space recently and in the tech space, make mass layoffs over email or make mass layoffs over Zoom. I would argue that the thinking that went into that was probably a little too fast and loose, and wasn't thinking about the potential ramifications, both to the organization, its brand, but also to the human beings,
Yeah.
right? That you had inside your four walls, who showed up every day and spent 8 to 10 hours of their working life, right? Inside your four walls, committed to your organization. An emotionally intelligent leader would have taken the time to step back and to have the awareness to think about all the downstream implications of what was about to occur. How should it be done? What's the most empathetic way to approach this? How do I ensure that I am demonstrating the commitment to those human beings, right? That I'm about to just transform their lives in a potentially very negative way, right? Because obviously, being laid off it's tragic.
Yep.
It's a heartbreak, right?
Devastating. Wow.
There's a level of identity, that you put into your work, and when that's disconnected, people get depressed, right? So I would argue that taking the time to slow down to make those kinds of critical decisions will benefit everybody.
Yeah. Powerful testimonial for slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And when we think about human dignity as an outgrowth of hard things like reductions in force, we can't afford as leaders in this particular day and age to miss that. We have every opportunity to get it right. And it requires a very high degree of emotional intelligence and a value of the human experience, in order to achieve outcomes that may still be really hard decisions, but how they land and what they leave intact is such a critical piece to consider. So leaders that are listening, take note. Micah's giving us a really important, really, I'm receiving it as a statement of encouragement, also a warning flag that we can't afford not to be more intentional about pace in order to create speed in the long run. Well, as I shift gears now, as we kind of round out our time, I want to really talk about the age of AI, and then I want to make sure we leave a minute or two so you can tell us a little bit about forces of nature, and also a little sneak peek to the current book that you're writing to give our audience some intrigue. But a lot has been predicted about AI. There's sort of sense of, there's I don't know if it's false rah excitement, but there have been a few recent reports that have said there's never been a greater moment where human beings and relationships are needed. When you take the rational tasks of a given job or a role, that what is now going to be amplified and needed is going to be the capacity for human beings and for relationship building, for human connection, that it's going to be even more important now because, and the distraction of all those rational things now will likely have speed and ease, but it's the then what. So why should we be excited about AI? Even though we can anticipate maybe short-term consequences or shifts or changes, like if you were giving again in the age of AI, why should human beings be excited about this when it relates to the human experience?
I think there's a number of reasons to be incredibly optimistic and excited about AI. But on the other side, I also think there's reasons to be apprehensive about AI. We can cover both. When I think about the potential for AI, it's limitless, right? When you think about how it could possibly transform the nature of work, right? That the potential there is huge. The what if scenarios. What if we could take the drudgery out of certain roles, and where AI is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and human beings are focused on creativity and innovation, and driving the organization forward, and maintaining those human bonds with our customers, our partners, our suppliers, etc. When you think about the potential for AI, when it comes to the impacts to humanity, can AI cure cancer? Can AI help us get to Mars? Can AI transform climate change? Right? Can in terms of modeling and the development of engineered systems to sequester carbon from the environment, any number of things, right? it's huge. And then when you compound that, with now we're not just in the age of AI, we're truly in the age of robotics, right? We're seeing that,
Yeah.
humanoid robots are going to be mainstream in 5 years, full stop. You will go to a hotel, and the agent making your bed will not be a human being. It will be a humanoid robot. I can guarantee it. We all know corporations, they're always seeking to shave costs. They're always seeking opportunities, right, to increase the profit margin. That's a huge area. If you're a Marriott, you're a Hilton, you're looking at, humanoid robots as housekeeping. That said, that also opens up, a huge amount of opportunity for humans to do other kinds of work that we haven't been focused on, and work that hasn't even yet been invented, which will be invented as these transformations continue to roll out. So yeah, I'm both optimistic. At the same time, when you look at it through a leadership lens, right? This is where emotional intelligence really comes into play. How are you as a leader assessing those opportunities? How are you looking at it through the lens of your own organizational change? How it will impact your company's operating system, including human beings? What is your commitment to those people? If you're going to shift work from humans to agents, what do those people do, or are they just let go? I would argue that it should be a it's like you go to a fast food restaurant, you get a burger. Like, would you like fries with that? Right? Like, the same thing with AI. It's like, hey, yes, AI can really help transform the organization. That doesn't necessarily mean that you let the people in your organization go. The question is, what work could they be doing for the organization that they're not doing because they're stuck doing relatively dumb work, whether it's reconciling, the accounting, or it's making mundane CRM entries as a salesperson. If you can have agentic AI do that, then couldn't those salespeople be more focused on, extending those relationships at a human level, right? Getting out into the field, spending time with customers, right? There's so many areas of opportunity. And I think we as leaders, they should be thinking about AI as being additive, right? As opposed to the zero sum decision of like, well, I will create 4 agents to replace 20 people.
Right. Yeah. Okay. First of all, what a practical challenge and charge for leaders to reconsider, so that instead of looking at AI as a mechanism of profitability improvement and the, releasing the need for human bodies to take things on, wouldn't it be an awesome charge or challenge for us to consider what if? What if we had this extra time and capacity? How might we deploy it to create new value, to create new lines of revenue, to create new lines of innovation, to create new lines of experiences, whether it's client or customer experience, employee experience, community experience? Like, how might we point our human talent towards things that we, as you said, haven't even been invented yet? And I'm imagining that in the speed of trying to capitalize and harness the upside of cost savings, we may have emotionally intelligent leaders, or lack of emotionally intelligent leaders, missing that window of reconsideration and redeployment. So I'm hoping, if nothing else, that people are listening today in the spirit of slow is smooth, smooth is fast. This would be a good place to be slow, to really contemplate and to consider what if and what's possible in a way that could maybe drive a whole nother level of value, and continue to find ways to create human dignity through work, and that there is value for human beings. Working produces fruit that isn't just for businesses, but it's for our entire community and all of the ecosystems. What else would you say, as we're thinking about, again, if a leader's listening and they're thinking like, okay, you've convinced me to maybe pump the brakes. You've convinced me that I may do well to be a bit more mindful of my own status of human intelligence. What other advice would you be giving people right now in terms of practical things? So if I'm a leader that's maybe a little intrigued listening, but I'm not entirely sure what to do next, what are some practical things that you would encourage people to either start with? Are there things to read? Are there things to research? Are there just reflections? What would you advise?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a myriad of books that people can read,
Including
but
yours.
yeah. Well, of course, but the advice I would give is this: when you think about, AI in the age of automation that we're in today, you know, one, I would discourage silver bullet thinking, right? In terms of thinking as, this AI solution is a silver bullet to solve this problem, because the reality is it won't, right? Unless you're very, very intentional about how you approach the design, development, deployment of these systems and how you integrate human beings with those systems, right? And then when it comes to the integration of human beings with systems, the one thing that we know often gets, either forgotten about or is kind of an afterthought is upskilling, reskilling.
Yeah.
How do we properly address the upskilling or reskilling needs of our employees when it comes to co-piloting with AI? What are the critical skills, power skills, generative skills that they need to develop in order to really be excellent at that? Right? And I think that often gets left to the wayside. I'm seeing it, more frequently than I would care for in organizations that I advise.
Yeah. I think again, it is almost it's a humanity question right now. I think about all of the benefits associated with AI if you're looking purely through the lens of a balance sheet. And yet, how much profit does one business need to make at what cost of creating meaningful work for a meaningful life and experience and contribution as a human being, and really understanding the interplay of upskilling and reskilling as a point of value creating, not a handout, not a social program, but rather what is possible in the world of work for which AI can play a critical role. But I love that idea of co-piloting.
Yeah, I think you just hit on something which is really critical to think about. When you think about AI's ability to kind of 10x the organization, across the board, why is it the leaders are not leveraging their emotional intelligence, their power skills, their generative skills to think about, hey, we don't need to make unnecessary trade-offs. We can make a lot of money and be a benefit to society. We can make a lot of money and have a positive impact on our environment, on our climate. We can make a lot of money and make work enjoyable. What is the possibility? If I'm a CEO, I'm like, AI may give us the opportunity to give our employees a 4-day work week. And if we're making the same, if not more money, there's no need to trade off. Like, well, you're going to work 4 days, you're going to get less money. BS, right? BS, because people already give enough. So if AI can give us the ability to move to that 4-day work week, or God forbid, a 3-day work week, why not? Why not? What if that? What? Can you imagine the benefit that would give the society? More time with your family, more time in your community, more time for us to advance human society, more time to learn,
Yeah.
more time to
We just
grow,
want to be
right?
healthy
Yeah,
to care for ourselves. Yeah.
increase human lifespan, right? There's so many things we could do, and I think that's one thing that leaders need to do is to lean into their emotional intelligence, but also the power skills, but also lean into those generative skills, and always be asking the question of what if we did this? What if we took the opportunity to be better?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to go mind blown with that possibility. And wow. Well, before we end today, tell us how we find you. Tell us about your podcast and give us a little peek under the tent as you're continuing to just research and engage in this content. So first of all, how do people find you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. It's just my first and last name at both places. I also have a website. It's mikaSellers.com. And I do occasionally have the opportunity to blog, although not nearly as much as I would like to. And then I have a podcast. I started a podcast end of last year with a dear friend, Annie Graziani, soon to be Dr. Annie Graziani. It's called Forces of Change. And what we explore are those forces, political, environmental, technological forces in business that are changing the nature of humanity, right? That are really impacting us in both positive and negative ways. And what we tried to do is take a journalistic approach to that, bring in amazing subject matter experts, interview them as, kind of pseudo journalists, and then let the audience, draw their own conclusions as opposed to kind of a talking head type of a podcast. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, and also YouTube.
That's
And
great.
then, yeah. So,
Well, before I just need to correct something. I said Forces of Nature, which I think is a Ben Affleck movie. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Forces of Change. All right. So that's great. And then tell us a little bit about the book.
Sure. About a month ago, I started working on my next book. And what I'm looking, kind of riffing off of my podcast, Forces of Change, what I'm looking at are, the political systems, the business systems, the policies we put into place, the technologies we've developed, how those inventions are outpacing our ability as humankind to wisely wield them, and why emotional intelligence needs to be the civilizational operating system. And if we don't harness that in a real meaningful way, these inventions could lead to our end, or if we do, how they may accelerate our ability to be the best versions of humans that we can be.
All right. Well, that feels like the place to drop the mic, where emotional intelligence is a civilizational operating system.
Yeah.
Well, from your mouth to my ears to our audience, Mikah, thank you so much for being with us today, for your great wisdom. I'm encouraging all of our listeners to check out, to get to know you better and the work that you're doing. And thank you for the work. And thank you for holding space to challenge us today, as I will contemplate really the impact of emotional intelligence as an operating system, to see it not only as those power skills, but those generative skills. And as we begin to see how that can harness thinking, behaving, and relationship building in a way that can elevate, can upskill, reskill, can change the game in human experience. So thanks for your time. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Eyes forward into the arena.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.